Welcome back. Okay, I'm going to dive straight back in. Don't forget, if you want to win or be in the draw to win a free book, subject enter to that email address. If you're talking about us on social media, please use that hashtag. I hope you're enjoying it so far. It seems like you have been. Okay. Nicola Martin is up next, so please give a round of applause to Nicola. Oh, you're all so canny. Nicola Martin is an author and marketing manager from Bristol. Her debut psychological thriller is called Dead Ringer, and the Daily Mail called it tense and compelling. Nicola blogs about books and writing at nicolamartin.com, and you can follow her on Twitter at nmartinwriter and Instagram at nicolamartinwriter. So everybody, huge round of applause for the lovely Nicola Martin.
Hello everyone, thank you very much to Vic and to Simon behind the scenes. I'm absolutely thrilled to be here. We've had some amazing readings, so I'm already in awe of my fellow panelists. This evening I will be reading from Dead Ringer, which is my debut psychological thriller. I'll just give you a bit of background about Dead Ringer. It all starts with an app. Now, imagine there was an app where you could upload a photo of yourself and find the person in the world who looks most like you, your doppelganger. Now, would you want to meet them? In the case of the novel, the two protagonists, Ella and Jem, connect through this app, and they look identical, but they're from completely different walks of life. One of them is a London socialite, a little bit outrageous, and the other one's from a little town in Cumbria called Walney Island, a bit in over her head. The thing that they both have in common is that they're harboring big secrets, and when they meet, it sets them on a deadly collision course. So Dead Ringer is out now in audiobook, paperback, and ebook. And I will give you a little taste of the opening chapter. When I first met my double, I was disappointed by how little she looked like me. Ellie! The woman waved her arms above her head, like I might miss her. Not likely. An oversized orange beanie bounced against her head, and her mouth stretched in a theatrical O. Ellie! It's Ella, I tried to say, but my lips were stuck together. Over the course of the day's long train ride, I'd wondered if our first meeting might have the feeling of a long-lost twins scenario. We'd scan the station's crowds until, miraculously, our eyes locked. We'd rush towards each other and fall into a hug. No, stupid. That was a daydream borrowed from a bad movie. In the broadest terms, we looked alike. Pale skin and elfin features, with a mop of hair that was either dirty blonde or dishwater brown, depending on the light. But Jem, with her ugly beanie, wasn't my twin. Her appearance was far removed from the girl in the photo, with her sleek hair and minimal makeup. I probably didn't look the same as my picture either. As Jem's gaze bored into me, I ran a hand through my unwashed hair. I was all too aware of the dark circles under my eyes. The version of me on the app was the good Ella, the one I could just barely remember. The real me was much less impressive. Are you Ellie? Jem bounded over to where I stood. It's Ella? The blare of a train announcement swallowed up my voice. I shifted my tatty backpack from shoulder to shoulder. It was Saturday afternoon and hordes of passengers streamed past us. The bump of a stray elbow buffeted me half a step backwards. Jem was talking over me. It's so great to meet you. It's great to meet you too. Another person shouldered past us, shoving me aside. Jem seemed unaffected by the crowd, but I was beginning to feel lightheaded. This stupid plan of mine to travel halfway across the country to meet my double wasn't just a waste of money. I had a strong feeling I was about to make a fool of myself. In our messages through the app, I'd already lied to Jem to make myself sound more interesting. I'm coming to London anyway. Lie. I've got some friends there. Lie. Might have a lead on a job. Lie. In truth, I'd come to London because... What are we doing? Jem turned away, aiming her question only vaguely at me. Coffee? What am I doing? Why am I here? I said. Jem turned back to look at me. Coming? I'm not so sure. I flinched as she squeezed into my personal space. I've been so excited to meet you, she said. Honestly, it blows my mind how much you look like me. We could be sisters, I swear. We'll get some coffee, get some food, find something to do. It'll be marvellous. Jem's rapt gaze, the insistence of her words, disarmed me. Up close, I could see the resemblance clearly. Me and Jem, we dressed differently. We spoke differently. We held ourselves differently. But the eyes, they were the same. Same shape, same shade. We had the same wide mouth, the same angular face. Looking at her was like passing an unexpected mirror and not being sure if it was your reflection you were seeing or another person. Despite the cold day, despite my jangling nerves, I felt a rush of unexpected warmth. I'd experienced the same feeling when Jem's profile had loaded on the app. The fact that we looked alike, perhaps it was a fluke. Yet I'd felt an instant connection with the stranger on the screen, and I felt it in person too. Jem squeezed me into a hug and then released me. Come on, she said again. I took a deep breath and fluffed up my hair. Lifting my chin, I made an effort to walk tall, pushing through the crowds confidently. This was why I'd come to London, for the noise, the bustle, the sense of life in full colour. I can do this. I can be this person. And that was Dead Ringer. Thank you very much. Back to you, Vic.
Thank you very much, but we're actually going to stay with you, Nicola. We have a question from Jackie McLean who'd like to know, would you like to meet your doppelganger?
Well, I would actually. I wrote this novel, which, no spoilers, but it doesn't end well. I mean, doppelganger is basically the worst thing that happens to both of these characters. And yet still, I'm intrigued. I think the idea of a doppelganger it lets you imagine a different life for yourself, because there's this other person walking around out there and they've got your same face and yet they're doing something completely different. It's fascinating.
I did once drive past somebody that I, for a moment, thought was me and then realised it wasn't me. So anyway, yeah, moving on. We have a question from Amy Fraser for all of our writers. So Nicola, I'll start with you. In your current work in progress, are you steering clear of COVID society changes, or are you adapting in anticipation of new social distancing world?
In my work in progress, no, you've got people doing crazy things, like they spend half the time in the bar. I mean, they're all just sort of like draped all over each other, and I'm like, oh God, keep your distance. But it's lovely to sort of step into an alternate world where we don't need to worry about germs and stuff.
Thank you. Darren, how about you?
I think the whole world is going to be talking about this for a long time. You know, there's going to be so many books, and I dare say there'll probably be COVID the musical at some point. So in my current work in progress, we've had big discussions about, and we've had to rewrite the timeline quite a lot because it was set around now, sort of March, April 2020. So we've had to shift the year because for me, I don't want to be reading about this thing once it's done. So I don't want to subject that on anybody. So moving forward, it might have to be referenced perhaps, but no, COVID can do one for me.
In fairness, we're getting a lot of love for COVID the musical on the chat, so you may have hit upon something.
I've got jazz hands, I'll bring them.
Excellent. Noelle, how about you?
Hello?
Hello.
Oh, good. I'm actually really vague in my timelines and stuff. So I'm currently near the end of my 4th book, and it kind of happens just before all this kicked off. So I'm not even going near it. But in the next book, when I start that, I think I'm going to vaguely reference it, but the police still have to do a job. So they're not going to be isolating at home. So I think I'll just kind of gloss over it a little bit, mention it, but nothing, I'm not going to go deep into it because I don't want to read about it.
Same. Chris?
Yeah, similar. I think, at the moment although we're facing up with this situation, we're also craving escapism, which, fiction is. And so even in my writing, I'm not really addressing it, I think, because I want some time out from this situation. I'm fortunate in that the new thriller I'm working on is a very tightly focused setup with just primarily 2 characters in a room. So there's not much scope for dealing with it. However, I have been writing a feel-good novel at the same time, which is the whole setup is it's set on a transatlantic flight, and I have a fear that may now be fundamentally changed by what's happening in the future on transatlantic flights. So we'll see. I'm sure it'll affect it in some way.
Yeah, I'm sure. Michelle, how about you?
Hi. Yeah, I'm taking the same approach. First of all, because I think that people don't necessarily want to read about it right now. I think that they want to escape, and I want to escape, just like Chris said. The other thing is that the book that I had contracted to write is a child who's killed in an elementary school. And since schools are no longer now a thing, I have to sort of pretend this never happened. So, yes. Yeah.
We'd all like to pretend it never happened, don't worry. Amer?
I'll be reading from my current book, which is just finished. And really that was written just before all of the COVID stuff happened. So the book's kind of set before, and the one I've currently just started, there's no specific time, so it could be set before, and depending on what happens after this is all over, it could just as easily be set after. So I think there will be some influences and there might be some reference, but it shouldn't actually affect the story that I want to tell very much.
Great, thank you. S.E. Lynes, how are you feeling about all of this?
I can tell you because I'm just unmuted. What I think about that is that whenever I'm writing anything, what I'm most worried about will filter into the narrative, whether I want it to or not, but it won't be in any concrete way. And so when I wrote Can You See Her, it is about a woman of a certain age who is in a bad place. And I think when I finished it, I realized that one of the major themes was how anger becomes hate, and in that process it kind of misdirects itself, and that hate is always visited on somebody who perhaps is not the reason for the anger. Mm-hmm. I think when I got to the end of that book, I just thought Brexit was in this book as a kind of smoke. And I think the one I'm writing at the moment, I've just moved it back a year so as to avoid, directly dealing with COVID. However, there are themes of isolation and collective responsibility, which I think, again, have gone in, I guess, almost by osmosis, because these are the things that have concerned me on a sort of deep level as I've been writing it. So I guess what I'm talking about is the subconscious, I guess, what goes in.
Thank you. Julia?
Yeah, well, the one I read from the childminder, I have actually decided to kind of incorporate it, because there's a diary element that happened in an unspecified period of time before the main events. So I'm kind of setting it at some point in the kind of couple of years in the future. I bloody hope this is over by then. But the diary was written during. So it was quite claustrophobic anyway, and now it's going to be even more claustrophobic because it's written in an online diary written during lockdown. So yeah, and again, like Celia, I just the themes of isolation, wanting to be safe, escape, and kind of all these people going to this very remote rural community in southern Italy kind of all seem to work really nicely with it. So I am going to use it.
Great, okay. That's unusual. And Louise, Beech, over to you.
Well, luckily for me, I've already written next year's book, which was set in 2018, so I'm kind of safe there. But I did start writing my own memoir at the end of last year, which I decided to write because last year I've talked about this, so I'm happy to share. My mum jumped off the Humber Bridge in a suicide attempt last year, and so I decided to start writing my memoir and do flashbacks to our childhood. And as I arrived at the present day, which was January, February, March this year, obviously it started to happen. So I've had to write it as a thing that's ongoing while I'm writing the book, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So I've already addressed it, but whether or not I would write fiction surrounding it, I'm not sure. Yeah.
Excellent, thank you for that. Okay, thank you everybody for that. I hope we answered your question. I think we did. But I am interested, Amy, whether you would want to read fiction featuring COVID. Personally, not that anybody asked for my opinion, but I definitely don't want to read about it. I'm sick of hearing about it and I wish it would just go away. Anyway. All right. Chris Ewan, him of the wonderful bookshelves and lovely red sofa that's getting a lot of love on the chat this evening. Chris Ewan's latest thriller is A Window Breaks, written under the pen name of C.M. Ewan. He is also the author of a number of best-selling and critically acclaimed standalone thrillers, including Safe House and Dark Tides, as well as The Good Thief's Guide to series of mysteries about globe-trotting crime writer and burglar for hire, Charlie Howard. I'm really delighted to have Chris with us this evening, so everybody, huge round of applause for Chris Ewan.
Hello everyone. Yeah, I have unmuted. I'm glad that you're liking the bookshelves, because this screen is very carefully angled so you can't see the mess on that side of the room. This is where I write. There's a dartboard over there. I throw darts when I get stuck, which happens far too often. I'm going to be reading from my most recent book, A Window Breaks, which you heard is published under the pen name of C.M. Ewan. It was published in February in paperback. It's a story really about that fear we all have, I think. It's a kind of unique fear we all have, and a unique fear we've all experienced, which is that moment where you wake up in the middle of the night unexpectedly, and then you think, did I just hear something downstairs? Was there a noise in the house? If there was a noise in the house, am I actually going to get out of bed and do anything about it? What if I lie here and there's an axe murderer downstairs in my lounge? And all these thoughts kind of go through your mind. And that was kind of the seed for the book. And the story itself is about a family, husband Tom and his wife Rachel, and their teenage daughter Holly and their dog Buster. They've had a traumatic time as a family. So some months ago, their teenage son Michael died in a car crash. Tom and Rachel's marriage has come under strain, and they're going through a trial separation, and they've also just been mugged in London. And so a friend of the family, Tom's boss, says, look, I think you all need to get away. You need to heal as a family. And I just so happen to have a luxury lodge in the Scottish Highlands, and I think you should go there and heal as a family and spend time together, which they do until 2 a.m. on the first night when they hear a noise downstairs. So I mentioned earlier that rarely I'm going to read, instead of from the beginning of the book, I'm reading from chapter 12, a kind of edited version of that. So this is the moment where they hear the noise. Tom, Rachel shook my shoulder. Tom, wake up. She whispered close to my ear. I think I heard something. I groaned and mashed my face into my pillow. Tom, it sounded like a window breaking. I think there's someone downstairs. I groaned some more. Rachel is a light sleeper. She hears bumps in the night, and I'm the one she's turned to again and again to get out of bed and creep downstairs to investigate. Tom, it was warm and fuggy under the covers. My legs were tangled in Rachel's legs, and I could so easily drift off again. I could hear the hitch of fear in Rachel's voice, but it wasn't quite enough to tug me back to full consciousness. Then a vague, distant noise made me stir. It could have been the sound of glass crunching underfoot. My heart clenched as Rachel yanked on my upper arm. Tom, wake up, please. Eyes open, listening hard. The room was black. The only light was the faint glow of my wristwatch. It was just after 2 a.m. Another slight crunching sound. Oh God. I blinked and stared into the pulsing darkness as a great sucking fear invaded my chest. In my mind, I was watching a kind of home movie rendered in fuzzy grayscale. I was picturing a long, uninterrupted tracking shot, the visual equivalent of the auditory hunt I was carrying out with my ears. The camera in my mind's eye went snuffling across the carpet and out of the bedroom door. It sped low along the unlit hallway, sweeping left and right in small, tight arcs, like a bloodhound following a scent. When the camera reached the mezzanine, it pitched up and then down over the polished steel banister rail, overlooking the vaulted space below. It dropped on a wire, spinning and sweeping, sniffing out the source of the gritty crunching I had heard. I'm scared, Tom. Shh. Was that the whisper of the sliding glass door onto the deck being pulled back? And now the dull thud of the door hitting the rubber buffer. Rachel clutched my arm again. I didn't have any clothes on under the covers, and all right, it shouldn't have been a big deal right then, but it's amazing how being naked can make you feel more vulnerable. Silence. I waited. My heart jackhammered in my chest, pushing me up off the mattress. Rachel's fingers dug into my flesh. The silence persisted, but this was no natural hush. It felt loaded, felt forced, like someone was holding their breath downstairs. I was listening so intensely, it was as if I could hear the throbbing of the very air itself, the sound of millions of tiny molecules rubbing and vibrating against one another. It was a sound like no other, the sound of pure fear in the middle of the night. And before Rachel had woken me, had I heard something else? I could dimly remember a noise from the deep recesses of my dreams, a keening, buzzing whine like a tumble dryer thrashing around on a fast spin, like a chainsaw felling a tree. Real or imagined, intruder or not. Footsteps, Rachel whispered. You think? Yes. Downstairs, and voices, I think. Cold sweat sluiced across my forehead, down my neck. But there was nothing now. Nothing other than images of an empty room transmitting back from the imaginary camera feed in my head. All I could hear were the muffled night noises of a house at rest, the bluster and whoop of the wind outside, the drumming and lashing of rain on the roof, and the hammering of the blood in my ears. Okay, think. Maybe I hadn't locked the sliding door quite right. That was possible, wasn't it? It was my first time locking the door, and I could have made a mistake. I'd been preoccupied. I'd been drinking. So maybe I hadn't locked the door right, and the wind had buffeted and sucked at it, or maybe a fallen branch had cracked a glass pane. I waited. Hard to know what was worse. Part of me craved confirmation, however bad that might be. Part of me absolutely dreaded it. My mouth was dry, my chest very tight, my mind still caught in the gummy bind of sleep. But my instincts were alive to the threat. I could feel the hairs on the backs of my arms standing to attention. Rachel flinched and spun towards the doorway, the mattress springs creaking too loud. Had she heard something? She was clenching my hand very tight now. It reminded me of the way she'd held it when she was in labour with Michael and Holly. Holly. Could it be Holly, I whispered. Why would she go outside? So Rachel had heard the sliding door too, or thought that she had. A deep, penetrating chill engulfed my heart. I'll go and take a look. Be careful. I threw back the covers and sat on the edge of the bed. The night air was crisp. Goosebumps sprouted across my arms, shoulders and legs. My boxers were twisted up on the floor. I slipped them on. Then I crouched next to my suitcase, put on some jogging trousers and a vest, and padded across the room in my bare feet. I paused at the doorway, listening, then slipped out into the corridor beyond, exactly like the journey I followed with the camera in my head. Only the corridor wasn't unlit, not completely. There was the soft glow of the bedside lamp in Rachel's room, bleeding into the black across the way, and at the end, beyond the mezzanine, the wavering halo effect from the downstairs lights. Holly must have flipped them on. I felt a sudden surge of relief, a slackening in my limbs. She was a good kid, considerate not to wake us, brave when I thought of all she'd been through recently, but she'd nearly given her parents a coronary. I strolled on towards the light burning up from the living area. I was rubbing at my eyes, stifling a yawn. I was getting ready to talk with my daughter. But when I reached the front of the mezzanine and took hold of the banister rail, a sudden electric charge ripped through me. It wasn't Holly down there. It was far, far worse than that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chris. We do have a question from Kirsten Mackenzie from you.
Oh.
For you even. She says, why have you chosen to write this one under a pen name?
It's a combination of factors, really. It's a fresh start with a new publisher at Pear Macmillan, and a chance for them to relaunch me to the market under a slightly different name, but they were kind of keen to keep the surname of Ewan because I'd had some books like Safe House do pretty well in the past, and they hoped that people would find their way to it. And the other thing, not to put too much of a downer on the nights, but my dad became very ill while I was writing this book, and within the space of a fortnight he was taken into hospital. We were told he had incurable cancer and he was given 2 weeks to live. And it was just at the point at which Pear Macmillan were deciding on my pen name. And I knew that they were talking about keeping Ewan and possibly having C at the start and something else. And my dad's name was Colin Moore Ewan. So I rang up my editor the day we found out the news, and total emotional blackmail said, do you mind if we use my dad's initials so that I can tell him before he died? So that's why I ended up in CMU.
Oh, I'm sorry to hear about your dad, but that's a really lovely story. Thank you for sharing that with us. Thank you. Okay, so on to the next one, as Jay-Z said. I'm hip, I know what the kids are like. Anyway, so Anwar is next. Yay! So Anwar grew up in West London. After leaving college, he had a variety of jobs, including, brace yourselves, warehouse assistant, comic book lettering artist, a driver for emergency doctors, and chalet rep in the French Alps. He eventually landed a job as a creative art worker / graphic designer and spent the next decade and a half producing artwork, mainly for the home entertainment industry. I am going to have to clarify this with you in a minute, Amer, but we'll get there. He has an MA in creative writing from Birkbeck University of London and is a winner of the CWA Debut Dagger Award. Woo! His first novel, Brothers in Blood, featured as one of the Times and the Guardian's Books of the Year and was recently picked by the Times and the Sunday Times Crime Club as one of the best novels in the last 5 years. Woo! The second novel in the Zack and Jag series, Stone Cold Trouble, will be published this September. So everybody, Anwar.
Thank you. So yeah, I'm going to be reading from Stone Cold Trouble, which isn't out till September. So I don't actually have a copy of the book. I don't even have any proof copies or anything. And I'm going to be reading it off the screen. So it'll be from the manuscript. The book is the sequel to Brothers in Blood, which is also on Kindle for 99p and Apple iBooks and everything. So if you wanted to read that, go and grab a copy while it's at that really, really cheap price. I did tweet the other day that it's cheaper than a pack of condoms. So, and almost as exciting. And the book itself, like the first one, like Brothers in Blood, Stone Cold Trouble is set in West London. in the area of Southall, where there's a big Asian community. The main character is Zach Khan. He's an ex-con. He's been out of prison for about a year, and the only job he can get is as a delivery driver at a builder's yard. And Stone Cold Trouble is set a few months after the end of Brothers in Bloods. And I'm going to read from the opening. It's a Friday evening. Zach's been stuck in traffic after his last delivery of the day. His best friend Jags has just phoned him up, and Jags's uncle is round and has something that he wants to talk to both the guys about. So Zach drives across West London and gets to Jags's house. Jags has just got them all drinks and they've sat down, and that's where I'm going to pick up from. Okay, so Uncle, Jags said, what did you want to talk to me and Zach about? Lucky, that's Jags's uncle, Lucky picked up his drink and took a hefty swallow. He kept hold of the glass and breathed deeply before he spoke. I need your help. The way he said it, Zach figured it had to be more than just some simple building or decorating project, which was what he usually roped them in for. Okay, Jag said, what with? Lucky was clearly trying to work out what to say. Your auntie and me, he began, we went to a wedding last week. You know Diggy. Yeah, he runs your place in Hayes, don't he? Lucky nodded. Well, it was his youngest boy's wedding. Big do, he invited a load of us from work. Sounded to Zach like the perfect excuse for a piss-up. So, Lucky continued, I got drinking with some of the guys from the girls' side too, having a proper party and all that. Later on, we were still sitting around having a few shots, and they started talking about a card game. Uh-oh. As soon as Lucky mentioned the card game, Zach thought he knew where it was going. Jags's uncle might have been Lucky by name, but when it came to gambling, he was nothing of the sort. He'd probably lost money and needed to borrow some to help cover whatever he owed and keep it quiet from his wife, who was well aware of his gambling problem. Either that, or he wanted their help with some sort of dubious scheme to make a bit of quick cash. A bunch of them, Lucky went on, get together once a month for a poker night at one of their houses, get some food in, drinks, you know, make a night of it. Their next game was the day after the wedding, and they invited me and a couple of the other guys along. I thought, why not? Go along, have a drink, something to eat, bit of a laugh, play some cards, no big deal. He took another swig of his whiskey. Well, it all started off friendly enough, but then I guess the more we drank and played, the more serious it got. Serious how? Jags asked, though Zach was sure they both knew. We ended up playing for silly money. Lucky didn't look happy. He must have lost a significant amount. He took another hit of whiskey. But I was on a roll. I'm telling you, proper winning streak. End of the night, just a few of us left. We decided to have one last game. The stakes kept getting higher and higher. I had a fucking great hand. All 4 aces and a jack. It was a winning hand. I was sure of it. So what happened? Ended up just the 2 of us left. Me and this guy Shergill, whose house it was. Everyone else had dropped out. And I ran out of money. What? You just folded and gave it all away? A strange expression passed over Lucky's face. He seemed a bit peaky, as though he wanted to be sick. No, I didn't, he said, looking like someone who'd just discovered they'd shut their pants. Zach and Jags waited for him to tell them what he had done. He took another belt of whiskey. You know your auntie's necklace? Which neck? Jags started to say before it hit him. You mean the antique one? The family heirloom, with the emeralds and the other big stones and that? They could tell by Lucky's pained look that he did. What the hell have you done? Auntie will kill you if she finds out. It wasn't just a figure of speech. Okay, so she might not actually kill him, but there was every chance he'd end up needing hospital treatment. It was Monday night, Lucky said, holding his hands out, palms up, gesturing like it wasn't his fault. She'd worn the necklace to the wedding, wanted to show it off. We don't keep it at home, not with all the fucking break-ins happening all the time. Fuckers after all the Indian gold and jewellery Desi families have. We keep it in a safety deposit box at the bank. I took it to work with me on Monday so I could put it back during the day. Only things got bloody hectic and I didn't have time. Then it got too late, so I figured I'd just do it the next day. I had it with me when I went to the card game. You didn't just bet it away, did you, Uncle? Jags asked. I'm not that stupid, Lucky growled. I just used it as a marker to cover me for the game. I needed $5 to stay in. $5? And another 5 to see him, so 10 in all. The necklace is worth way more than that, so it easily covered the bet. Then what happened? He played his hand. Fucker only had a straight flush, king high. Lucky must have seen the blank looks on Zach and Jags' faces. A straight flush beats 4 of a kind. Shit, Jags said. They were quiet for a moment. But you only put the necklace down as a marker, Zach said. So all you got to do is give the guy 10 grand and get it back. Lucky's queasy expression transformed into a sour look. I tried that already. And he shook his head. Bastard said he'd changed his mind, decided to keep the necklace. Zach frowned. He can't do that, can he? Well, he has. Told me it was up to him as he won. Said I could keep the money. I told him the necklace is worth a lot more and he knows it. Probably shouldn't have said that. Anyway, I started to get mad and he fucking threw me out of his house. So what do you want us to do? Jags asked. I thought we could go and see him again, try and get him to give back the necklace for what I owe. I'll even throw in a couple of grand extra as interest or whatever. I was hoping you'd come with me. Jags looked at Zach. What do you think? Zach shrugged. Sure, why not? Might help if you don't lose your temper this time though, Uncle. Just try reasoning with him. Hopefully he'll see sense and take the money. Okay, should we go tomorrow? I need to get it back as soon as possible. I suppose we could go after I finish work, Zach said. I should be done by about 5, so let's say 6 o'clock. I'll pick you both up. His mood lightening, Lucky lifted his glass, only to find it empty. He grabbed the bottle, poured himself another finger of whiskey, knocked it back, and looked at them, concern tightening his features. Let's just keep this between us, right? Don't mention it to anyone, especially not your auntie or your mum and dad. Sure, no problem, Zach said. Jags agreed too. Thanks, boys, Lucky said with a grin. He got to his feet. I better get home for dinner. See you tomorrow. You sure you should drive after those whiskies, Uncle? Jags said. I can call you a cab. Oh, japere, Lucky said, waving him off. Those were nothing, just little pegs. I'll be home before they have any effect. You youngsters don't know what real drinking is. I know what drink driving is. I've never been pulled over for that. Maybe that's where all your luck went. Cheeky bugger. Jags showed his uncle out. I'll stop there, but as you might imagine, things don't go as smoothly as they hope.
Thank you very much for that, Amer. I've got a couple of questions for you. Jackie Morrison would like to know, as the debut Dagger long list is announced early in July, how important was winning this for your career?
Well, I won it quite a long time ago, and it was a bit of a fluke because I'd entered to get my first rejection. It was the first thing I'd sent any manuscript or anything off to, and I ended up winning. And it was massive because it got me an agent straight away, and that gave me the sort of self-belief to carry on and write the book. And it was my first attempt at writing a novel, so it took me about 8 years to actually write it because I hadn't tried before, and I didn't have any sort of novels in drawers that I'd worked on. I was starting from a standing start basically, and had to learn everything as I went along. So that's why it took so long. And this Stone Cold Trouble has only taken 2 years, so I'm getting faster.
Well done. Francesca Carey says, I grew up in West London, Ruislip, but very familiar with Hayes and Southall. And I find that the place and culture is totally misunderstood. People think of London as central, which is quite different from her experience. How do you strike a balance between setting an authentic scene / introducing the cultural quirks and progressing a plot?
I think the story is really character driven. So the characters, I suppose, could be from anywhere. And the cultural aspects and the setting, they're sort of put in, but, you know, like salt and pepper, I just sort of sprinkle them in throughout the narrative, and it just, I think, hopefully it just keeps reminding the reader of where they are. But once they're sort of swept up in the story, it's the characters that should just carry them along.
Great, thank you. And Samantha Jeffrey has asked a question for all of our panel, so I'll start with, oh, Mary Pickens just jumped in there. Does this book have all that wonderful cooking that the first book did?
It's got a little bit. It's got a little bit of that. Yes, some. I think I remember people were always saying to me they got really hungry reading the first book, and then they suggested, "Oh, you should put recipes in the back." And I thought, well, I don't want to do that. I could get in a lot of trouble with people telling me that's not how you do it.
Yeah,
that's not the right, because there's so many variations. So there's a little bit of there's a mention of food, because I guess it's quite important to them and the culture and stuff like that.
Great, thank you. Now I have a question for all of you, so I'm going to start with you, Amer, if that's okay.
That's okay.
Samantha Jeffrey has said, with books often selling for so little on Kindle, has digital been a good thing or not for authors? She appreciates it reaches more people, but is concerned that the financial reward is perhaps too low.
Well, I think I'd be able to answer that if I had really big sales, but my sales have been quite modest, so I couldn't really tell you. But I do know that authors get a higher percentage of ebook sales in the contract. I think that it's something like 25%, whereas over a paperback is about 10% or something.
Okay, thank you. Louise, are you pro or anti? I think that's a bit reductive just to ask you that, isn't it? But how do you feel about ebooks?
Well, you mean when they're 99p, you mean?
Mm.
Yeah. It is one way that you can get up the charts. I mean, that's kind of a pro, because when they're 99p, they often, they go up the charts, and even when it comes back to the normal price, they often linger quite high still. However, obviously, 25% of 99p is a lot less than 25% of, say, $3.99. Yeah. But would I rather sell more for that small percentage and less for the high? You're probably better off selling more for the, but it's a tricky one. Yeah. Does it devalue books? That's what I worry about. Does it devalue them?
I wonder as well, because, people say it takes some people, Amer took 8 years to write his first book, but 2 years to write his second one. People pay more for coffee. And I kind of, so Chris, how do you feel about that?
I feel like the coffee argument's a very good one. Ideally, we'd all be paying cover price for books. That would be the ideal situation. I don't think that's unreasonable. Having said that, I always feel a bit conflicted answering this question, because I'm one of those authors who benefited greatly from ebooks. I can remember when my first book came out, first couple of books came out before ebooks, and I can remember getting an email from my agent saying, "Do you want to try this ebook thing? Should we give your publisher permission to do it?" Not knowing if it was going to make any difference or not. And then a few years after that, my wife had given birth to our first child. This was in autumn of 2012. And the plan was that she's a teacher, and the plan was she would have 6 months maternity leave, and then she'd go back to work. And then, I laugh now with 2 kids, but the plan was I would write books around raising kids. And yeah. And then about a fortnight after Jessica, our first child, was born, I checked my ebook ranking, which authors do far too often, and saw that my book was on sale for 20p, and was kind of horrified. And it turned out this was back in the day when Sony e-readers, as then existed, were in a price war with Amazon. And so they were picking certain books to price at 20p. And for some reason, they picked Safe House. About a fortnight later, we were feeding my daughter in the middle of the night and saw that Safe House was at #1 in the chart. And it stayed at #1. And it was the Christmas #1 in 2012, which was the year, in theory, if people were getting e-readers for Christmas, that was the year they were getting them. And so all these people getting e-readers for Christmas opened their e-readers on Christmas Day. Safe House was #1 in the chart at 20p. And I think the whole top 10 were 20p books. And a lot of people bought it. And within about 4 months, it was so life-changing for me that my wife was able to give up work and didn't have to go back to work until our daughter went to school. So it gave us 5 years of sort of me being able to write full time. So although I would much rather people were paying more than 20p for a book, I can't really knock something that gave me exposure and that enabled people to enjoy Safe House and put some money in my pocket. So it's a double-edged sword, I think.
Excellent. I mean, I will say, you know, I say people spend more on coffee, but I do still buy 99p books. So, you know, I'm part of the problem, I guess. Julia. Oh, we've just missed the cat.
Yeah, he's gone off. He might come back. I mean, yes, it's nice to sell lots, even if they're 99p. I think that some people think that authors kind of are fabulously wealthy, but most of us kind of earn well below the minimum wage, and certainly if we at an hourly rate, it would be appalling. So, you know, money is important. And my I suppose my kind of concern, apart from all the government cuts that have been meted out to councils so that they've had to close libraries, is that if you can buy a book for 99p on your Kindle, you're less likely to borrow it from the library. And actually, for many authors, that little PL, well, sometimes quite substantial if you've got lots of novels out, at PLR check, which is every time somebody takes a book out of the library, you get a couple of pennies. And, you know, if you kind of make that over thousands of books being taken out every year in libraries, that can be, you know, kind of a nice gift in January. And, you know, 99p, you know, why bother go out to the library when you can just kind of click and get it on your Kindle for less than that's kind of a third of a cup of coffee. So yeah, that's something that needs to be borne in mind, I think.
Thank you. Michelle, are you a fan of the ebook?
Sorry, I don't know why my cursor disappeared. I agree that it's a very it's a hard question. I think that there are pluses and minuses. I do know some author friends of mine that are really wonderful authors and that write amazing books and are, you know, doing well on paper, but still have to have a day job in order to be able to write. And I think that so it's mixed. As a reader, I'm a big fan of libraries. I go to my library, and I know authors aren't getting as much money that way as if I actually buy their book. So it's this dance, and I think the water's just going to have to find its level.
Just moving on from that, just because I think you guys are all in agreement with regards to answering that question. Susie, do you have a day job? Or Noelle, I'll come to you, don't worry.
I was teaching creative writing for about 10, 11 years, and I kept that up part-time until I think my third novel came out, but it was my second with Bookouture, and Bookouture's deadlines are quite quick, and it just got to that point where there was just enough sales coming in for me to leave the community college there, and also I'd had some students, and I'd had them for about 5 or 6 years, so I was teaching the same students the same stuff, so I was kind of ready for a break from the teaching. So at the moment, yes, the short answer is yes, I write full time, and who knows, I'll probably go back to teaching as well. I do a wee bit of tutoring and stuff like that, and I've done some guest tutoring. I did a bit of guest tutoring in Athens for the British Council or something, and so it's a mix, but mostly full time.
Noelle, you are desperate to say something.
Yeah, yes. I work for a digital publisher, but I'm also published by a digital first publisher. So I have quite strong views because I think there's a kind of snobbery around ebooks sometimes. And, some of the authors I work with, and I work with Susie and Michelle, but some of them have gone on to give up their day jobs and are making quite a bit of money from just ebook sales alone. So I kind of feel I get really defensive about this, and my books are ebook, digital first, although I do have print run as well. But according to my contract, my money comes from the ebooks. And when you're with a digital publisher, your royalties are higher than the traditional publishers where it's 25%. So I don't know if people need to take that into account. And the books don't all stay at 99p. They go up in price. And when they're at 99p, you often capture a reader's interest, and they'll then go on to follow a series and pay more money for the books at a higher price. So now I'm going to zip it. I'm going to calm down because I was getting all like, no.
It's always good to have an alternative viewpoint. Darren, what's your thoughts on this?
I probably would have stopped at one book if I didn't have my book at 99p. So my debut did quite well, did okay, because in my opinion, it was priced at £1 and the cover was nice. And that kind of helped me find a readership. And I was digital first, so I'm with HQ for all of my books. Well, my first 3 books were digital first. If it wasn't for the digital platform, I don't think I'd be writing. So I'm really pro it. Plus also, I'm from working class background and I was incredibly poor in my 20s, and I couldn't afford, as much as I love being in Waterstones, and I used to go in a lot and sniff around, I could never afford to buy a book from there. So it was either the library, and then I got hold of my mum's old battered e-reader. And then when that happened, it unlocked a lot more books for me. So for me, I think digital makes reading so much more accessible, and that's all I want to do is be accessed.
And I think it's important to remember as well that on e-readers now, particularly important now that you can access libraries through BorrowBox on e-readers. So just a quick plug for the libraries, because I know there's somebody from the library that I work with in the audience. Hi Claire. We love libraries. Nicola, your thoughts?
Yes, I'm a big e-reader person. I read probably like 70% of my books on my Kindle, and the great thing about it is that it's so easy to impulse buy, which maybe authors don't have if someone actually has to physically go to the shops. Especially now, I think people are reading a lot more ebooks. So I think there are pros and cons, but for me personally, I just want people to read my books. And I think a good note to say is that if you are a reader and you're thinking, oh no, I didn't realize that authors don't get that much money from ebooks, you can always write a review or tell a friend, or there are lots of ways to help authors. The other thing I would say is that ebooks are just one kind of new tech. We also have audiobooks. They have absolutely skyrocketed since, you know, the rise of kind of new media, and that is an additional income stream for authors.
Thank you very much for that, and thank you for the discussion, because I think you've all had really great points in terms of different points of view. I've been reliably informed it is BorrowBox. I like to go to the library and pick them off the shelves, but you know, I can't do that now, so BorrowBox is the way forward. Okay, so final reader of this section of the evening is Michelle Chouinard. So let's pull up your information there, Michelle. Michelle's first fiction story was published in her local paper when she was 8 years old, and she fell in love with Agatha Christie novels not long after. After pursuing a PhD in developmental psychology and helping to found the University of California, Merced, is that right? Yes.
Merced, close enough.
My bad, sorry. The stories kept rattling around inside her skull. For sanity's sake, Michelle released them. Her debut novel, released a year ago, has since sold 120,000 copies, woo, and hit both the USA Today and Publishers Weekly bestsellers list. She loves cats, dogs, coffee, and zombies. So, all the way from San Francisco Bay, Chouinard.
Hi, thank you so much, Vic and Simon, for doing this. This is a really great event. I love this. And thank you to everybody who is watching. So I just heard from a really cool author, Louise Beech, that I should always hold up my book. So here's my most recent book, Her Daughters Cry. And my series is a police procedural series, and it's set in Western Massachusetts, which is where my family's from. So even though I live in California, I sort of am partly there. My main detective is Josette Fournier, and her superpower is that she reads people and situations a little bit differently than other people do. So she makes associations in ways that other people don't, and sometimes that is a blessing, and sometimes, unfortunately, it is a curse. So what I thought I would do is I thought that I would do a very, very short reading from my most recently published book, Her Daughter's Cry, and then do another very short reading from the beginning of my work in progress. So, all right, this is Her Daughter's Cry. The woman stumbled from the woods, face burned from the sun, feet aching with fatigue. She forced herself to keep moving forward as she fought to keep sight of the paved road, but after hours with no sunglasses, she could barely manage hurried glimpses through narrowed eyes. The trees in front of her blended into a wavering green-brown image. She coughed and her throat seized. How long it had been since she'd veered from the river to follow the road? 2 hours? 3? If she didn't get water again soon, she'd pass out. Something brown and white danced back and forth in front of her in the distance. She shielded her eyes and forced them open against the pain. The lines took form. Some sort of building? Adrenaline coursed through her and sped her steps toward it. She rubbed her eyes and peered out again. 2 buildings on either side of the road, maybe more. Maybe it was a town. She hobbled as quickly as she could manage. When she couldn't avoid it any longer, she stepped out into the road. A red-lettered sign topped a quaint country storefront, "Treasures from my attic." She pushed through the door, and the cheerful tinkling of the bell was at instant odds with the darkness that engulfed her. Her panic spiked as she froze, struggling to see. But within seconds, the black turned to dark gray and then to lighter gray. After hours in the sunlight, her eyes just needed to adjust. But then movement pulled her attention. The outline of a man rushed toward her, knocking over his chair in his hurry. She turned, ready to run. "Oh my God," he cried. "What happened to you? Are you okay?" She could make out his face now and his shocked expression. He was staring at her torso, because her blue and white checked shirt and jeans were caked with dirt and blood. "What happened?" he asked again. Her eyes raked his face. "I don't know. I can't remember." And so that's from Her Daughter's Cry. And I am going to transfer into my work in progress, which in my head I'm calling Little Girl Blue, but I try not to get too attached to my titles. So, oh, and I should warn that there is a child who is harmed in this one. It's not graphic, there's no graphic details, but if that is something that is a difficulty for you, you might not want to listen to this. Okay. Stephanie Roden leapt up from her desk and hurried out to the playground of Briars Ridge Elementary School, her cloud of curled black braids bounding around her head. The end of recess bell had startled her out of her lesson planning and sent an unsettling rush of adrenaline through her. 20-minute recesses were great for the kids, but horrible for the teachers, giving just enough time to shift into a task, but nowhere near enough time to finish it. She shoved her arms into her black jacket, then gathered her composure and pushed through the doors into the unseasonably cold spring air. Several of her kindergartners were already waiting on the strip of grass where the class gathered. She pulled out her whistle, gave 3 sharp tweets, and watched the little heads spin and run toward her. She smiled as they lined up, their faces cheerful and eager to please as she gently guided them into formation. Such little angels, all of them, even if they had their moments where they acted like little devils. Lively spirits were important, she liked to tell her trainee teachers who occasionally worked with her. You want to channel their beautiful spirits, not break them. She moved down the line, tapping each playfully on the head as she went. 14, 15, 16. 16. Not 17 as there should be. Someone was missing. She glanced back over the playground. It was empty except for Jim Carnegie, the 3rd grade teacher, and Luann Phelps, today's volunteer parent teacher, each walking with lollygagging stragglers. Everything was fine, she reminded herself. Someone had probably just gone to the outside bathroom without asking one of the 2 adults to supervise them. She ran through her class roster in her head. Nicole Marchand, she realized, and a tendril of fear gripped her. Nicole was the missing child, and it wasn't like her to go missing. She was quiet, cooperative, and never a troublemaker. She'd never go to the bathroom alone without a supervisor. She looked back at her students and kept her voice light. Does anyone know where Nicole is? They looked around at one another and shook their heads. She waved Luann over. I can't find Nicole. Do you know where she is? No. Luann's huge blue eyes widened further, and her blonde ponytail bobbed as her head whipped to scan the playground. Are you sure she didn't go in already? She might have, Stephanie said, but knew she hadn't. Can you stay here while I go check? Of course. Luann turned to the children and started them singing the Hokey Pokey. Stephanie waited until she was inside and out of view of the other children to break into a sprint. She checked her classroom, but it was empty. She checked the big girl bathroom, but it and the boys' room were empty too. She bolted back out to the yard, then slowed to a walk, shaking her head as she passed to let Luann know she hadn't found Nicole. With a practiced power walk, she surged down the midway of the playground, calling Nicole's name, hoping to find her crouched behind something, lost in her own private game. When she found nothing, she followed the perimeter of the yard back toward the school building, bobbing and weaving to check behind jungle gyms and utility sheds, but they were all abandoned and secure. Her heart thumped in her chest. She slipped around the corner and down the 10-foot space where the chain link fence ran parallel to the school building, ending at the back entrance of the cafeteria. Her fear spiked into panic as she sprinted toward the dumpster enclosure near the door, because the brown gate that fronted the red brick enclosure was slightly ajar. She called Nicole's name again and yanked it fully open and found nothing except a few errant lettuce leaves on the pavement between the two dumpsters. She dashed to the right side and checked it, then over to the left dumpster to be thorough. Nicole's crumpled body lay sprawled in the back corner, head covered by a puffy blue jacket. And that's it. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that. That was brilliant. Okay, we're going to go to our next break now, and then we have 3 more readers and a very special announcement. So don't go away. See you shortly. back. Last part of this evening's shenanigans. Lovely to see Michelle having a good chat about San Francisco, and people are enjoying the quotes this evening, so thank you to Simon for doing that. Okay, our next reader is S.E. Lynes. So, Susie Lynes writes as S.E. Lynes, and her critically acclaimed debut, Valentina, was published by Blackbird Digital Books in July 2016. Her second novel, Mother, was published by Bookouture in 2017, followed in 2018 by The Pact, and The Proposal. In August 2018, Valentina was published in a new edition by Bookouture and was followed in 2019 by gripping psychological suspense novel, The Women, and the dark family drama, The Lies We Hide. Gosh, she wasn't joking when she said those deadlines were tight. I can see Noelle laughing. So. Susie's new domestic noir novel, Can You See Her, is out now. Susie is a former BBC producer, has lived in France, Spain, Scotland, Italy, and now lives in Greater London with her husband, 3 kids, and her dog, Lola. She names the dog, but not the kids. That's fine, no judgment here. Susie has an MA in creative writing from Kingston University and is a writer, tutor, and mentor. So I'm delighted to welcome S.E. Lynes.
Thank you very, 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 very much. So this is my book that came out about a month ago. I think it's my 7th. And quite appropriately, it's about a woman of a certain age. And so I feel like it's so hot this evening that I've been having a hot flush now for about 2 hours. So I think that feeds quite nicely into the themes. So Rachel Edwards is a woman who is not in a great place. If you want the inspiration for it, it's at the risk of sounding a bit pretentious, it was an article about the invisibility of the older woman, and there was a little bit about Mrs. Dalloway in there, and about the fact that she realizes that she's invisible, but also that she has this ability to understand people very quickly by instinct. So I thought that might be quite fun to make a character who is northern, from my neck of the woods, who is uneducated and who is actually sort of working class. So she's sardonic, she's grumpy, she's working class, she's well read because she uses the library, she's a keen reader. But I thought that would be an interesting take on it. And we find her at the beginning of the book having handed herself in to the police because in the early stages of the book, she discovers one evening that she's invisible to her family, and goes and on progressively longer and longer dog walks to try and find some connection outside her family. But when violent crimes start happening in her town, she begins to worry that she might have done something bad. So this is her. I'm going to read you a tiny bit of chapter 1, just literally the first page, and then I'll read you a later scene. So this is how it starts. So chapter 1, Rachel. And I will be doing the accent of my hometown because I'll slide into it anyway, so I may as well just start. There are things I don't know, but I know people are dead. I know I killed them, and I know it all started the day I realised I was invisible. Mrs. Edwards. Her chair creaks. She must have shifted position. Do you think you could take us back to that, to realising you were invisible? I can. Of course I can. Like most people, if my mastermind specialist subject was myself, I'd win hands down. I look about me, try to settle. They've done their best to make this room look like an ordinary lounge in an ordinary house. Impressionist landscape in a frame on the wall, me on the sofa, her in the armchair opposite, neutral shades. But there's a recording device on the coffee table next to the box of tissues and the jug and the 2 glasses of water, so I'm not fooled. When you're ready, she says, take your time. Her eyes are blue, the colour of sea on white sand. I want to run in, but I'm not sure I won't drown in the cold water. I've forgotten her name. I know she's telling me to take my time, so I'll give them what they want, but I'm here to give them what they want. It was me that made the call, after all. I glance up from my fists clenched around a screwed up tissue on the lap. No one wants to be invisible, do they? So that's the first page. And so this is later in the book where she's struggling with this idea of invisibility, and she's going on progressively longer and longer dog walks, and she meets a very young girl who's lost her purse. And she engages this young girl in conversation and begins to feel a kind of connection. And this is a little bit further on. We reached the trees and I led the way to the pond. It was dark in there, but the moon bleached the tiny path, yellowed the edge of the pond where the water sliced the reeds. Shame you lost your phone, I said. We could have used it for a torch. Still, we've got the moon. She pulled her tin from her jacket pocket and sat down. She'd gone quiet. Now we were here, I sensed that she'd begun to ask herself what the heck she was doing and to feel afraid. But beneath her apprehension, she was enjoying herself. She was enjoying the pull of the fear, the danger. There was some nugget of rebellion in there for her. Oh, I remembered my youth as if it were the week before. That urge to do something reckless. I remembered a lad with a motorbike offering me a ride home one night after we'd been clubbing at Mr. Smith's. No, I'd said, when what I'd wanted, but not dared to say, was yes. I remembered summer nights roaming in the streets with Lisa and our other mates in drunken, noisy packs. I remember a stranger's face blurring on the dance floor late at night in some seedy dive as it loomed in for a thick-tongued kiss. Wanting to do things we shouldn't is as old as time. We sat together on the bench. I waited while she rolled me a cigarette. She handed it to me and rolled one for herself. She lit first mine, then hers. I didn't inhale, but even so, I coughed. You're used to roll-ups, I said. I prefer them. Oh, Joe, you funny little soul with your millennial worries and your self-sabotaging ways. Nothing matters, I wanted to tell her. But it'll take you till you're my age to realise that. And then you'll be free not to give a, it's nice here, she said. Peaceful. I took another puff and coughed again. I was enjoying her cigarette more than mine, if that makes sense. She pulled hard. The nicotine relaxed her shoulders a fraction down from her ears, lowering my stress levels along with them. I almost understood smoking in that moment. I moulded into the bench, stretched out across the back. I wanted her to relax against my arm so that I could comfort her little bird-like frame. But at the same time, I feared the connection might be too strong. It might electrocute me. It was exactly like a bond between mother and daughter, that closeness. Affinity. It's what I'd once had with Katie. Jo stood and wandered over to the pond. The orange glow of her cigarette tip pulsed in the dimness. I was thinking about what it would be like to drown myself in that pond, how cold the water would feel on my face. Except I wasn't thinking that. She was. Christ on a bike, the way she stared, the longing was written into her body as sure as ink on a page. I tied Archie to the leg of the bench and went to join her. I stood close, felt the pull towards that black mirror. If I pushed her in now, I could drown her. I knew that. I was bigger than her, stronger, and I had the advantage of surprise. All these years I'd existed as water flowing around my loved ones, fluid around their needs, keeping them afloat. Now I was water once again, and she was a drop ready to lose its meniscus, to become part of the whole, part of me. That was the ultimate connection. Drops, together with other drops, lost all boundaries, became water. Cohesion, that was the word I was looking for. In her death, it was possible I'd experience cohesion, or at least something real, something important. I didn't know how that would be, only that I wanted it. I placed my hand on her back between her shoulder blades. I could just... She turned to look at me and stepped back. "What do you do with your fag butts?" she said, throwing hers down, but crouching to pick it up once she'd ground it out with her boot. I staggered backwards, almost fell. I just put it out like you're doing." I wondered if she could hear the change in my voice. I barely had the breath to say the words. "I pick it up and I either find a bin or I take it home. Doesn't do to litter, does it? I can't stand people who litter." "I'd better get to my friends," she said. "Yes, let's get going." I look up to find blue eyes studying me. Intent is how you'd describe her expression. "And that's the last you remember?" she asks. "She left you in the gardens?" "No, we walked back down. I helped her over the railings, passed her the dog. I asked her if she wanted me to walk her the rest of the way, and she said no. We parted company on Boston Avenue, just along from where she was found." That's it.
Thank you. That was brilliant. Thank you. Excellent. Great stuff. Okay, so 2 left in the hat. Who's it going to be? Darren O'Sullivan.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, I sure can. So I'm just finding your intro.
I'm so glad I'm not last. Sorry, Noelle. Really sorry. I'm so pleased. I'm Darren. Hello, everybody. I'm going to be reading a little bit from my 4th book, Dark Corners, which was out about a month ago, I think. Just a little bit of context. Dark Corners is a story about Neve, who, when she was young, something tragic happened in the village that she grew up in, and she had an opportunity to leave, and she took it, and she's never looked back. And it's now present day, it's 2019, and circumstances within the village have forced her to return to where she grew up and face demons that she perhaps should have faced. I'm going to read the opening of the book, which is in 1999, shortly before Neve leaves forever. 15th of July, 1998. Can't sleep thinking about what we will do tomorrow. I'm scared he will know. I'm scared he will be watching me. Chapter 1. August 1998, 3 weeks after. Onward they trudged, step by step, deeper into the woodlands, trying as best they could to maintain the straight line they had been instructed to hold. They didn't speak. They could barely look one another in the eye. They all knew just one look would confirm their worst fears, that the searching was in vain. They weaved around bushes and climbed unsteadily over fallen trees. The mud, thick and heavy, made progress even slower, and on a few occasions the sludge underfoot dragged Wellington boots clean off tired feet. The summer had burnt bright and long, one of the hottest on record, but the woods were dark, cold. The air didn't move there. It hung heavily, its damp breath ancient, 1,000 whispered secrets over 1,000 years clinging to everything within. And somewhere within, she might be alive, hoping to be found. It had been 3 weeks since she had vanished, 3 long weeks. It didn't ring the bell of hope. Regardless, they didn't stop moving, they didn't stop looking. And in the middle of the group walked Neve. She moved silently, helped those who were stuck, and in return was helped when she became stuck herself. They had walked for long enough that the snapping of twigs and rustle of animals moving in the undergrowth no longer startled them. Upon reaching a clearing, they were told by the search leader, a policeman called Thompson, who had led the investigation, to stop and rest. Finding a felled tree, Neve sat and took a moment to look up through the thick canopy of summer leaves to see the sky beyond. It was beginning to morph in colour as day changed into night. A beautiful pink hue wrapped around a cloud. It looked contented, peaceful, oblivious. She assumed it'd be another hour until it was too dark to continue, and that would mean another night passed with no sign of her. The 20-second long night in the scared village. Neve caught her father watching from a small group stood in a circle, smoking hand-rolled cigarettes, discussing the next steps. He smiled, trying to be reassuring, but she could see the worry in his eyes. He looked tired, older somehow, But then again, everyone in the village now looked tired and old. After a few minutes of rest and foot rubbing, boots were back on and they were moving again, quietly scanning a patch of ground in front of each step. Punctuating the sound of snap twigs, heavy breathing of those less fit, wind through the treetops and bird call was one word spoken every now and then, a single name, her name, Chloe. Niamh could hear that the way it had changed in the past few days. They used to call for Chloe like it was a question, as if to say, Chloe, can you hear us? Chloe, where are you? Now the question mark had gone. The tone had deepened. Her name was now called because it was something they needed to do. If they fell silent, the search would be over. With each day, each night, the hope dwindled. A few nights alone, a person could survive. A week would be tough, but not impossible. But after 3, without a sign or sound, it didn't look good. And it placed them all in the awful position of wanting to find her, but not wanting to be the one to find her. No one said it, but as Niamh looked at those around her, she could see fear in their eyes. A fear of being the one to stumble across a 16-year-old girl, face down in a bog, bloated and blue. The village was used to accidents, death even. The mine that the village was built around had been a dangerous place to work, and men and women were often injured, sometimes horrifically. Pain and loss were a part of who they all were. It was part of their DNA. But no one was prepared to find Chloe. This sort of thing doesn't happen here, they said to one another after she'd gone missing. We look after our own. Despite the seriousness of Chloe's disappearance, gossip was rife, and being a small ex-mining village, gossip quickly became political. The scabs who crossed the picket line in '84 blamed the strikers, while they in turn insisted it was one of the scabs. When on a rare occasion, the gossip didn't thrive on a bitter feud that ran like ice through the vein of the village, the adults whispered in agreement about Chloe's mother, Brenda, who everyone knew had been vile and cruel to Chloe since the day she was born. It had been noted that Brenda hadn't been on one single search, but instead holed herself up at home, curtains drawn, refusing to speak to anyone until the police banged on her door. It was widely discussed that if anyone had harmed Chloe, it would have been Brenda. There was also another name that they should have been discussing, a name that Niamh and her friends had spoken to the police about, a name that was only ever mentioned by the adults in the village after a few drinks in the Miners' Arms or social club, a name that when brought up sent a shiver down the spine of the highly superstitious community, the Drifter. They didn't know who he was, and apart from Niamh and the rest of her friends, no one else had seen him. He had been spotted hanging around the closed mine, always at night, and most worryingly, Chloe herself had told Niamh he had been hanging around outside her house just before she vanished. The police were looking for him, stating he was a person of interest. They speculated that whoever he was indeed connected to the mine, which meant he more than likely lived in the village itself. But so far, no one had been spoken to, no one arrested. It was as if he was a ghost. The line of people searching came to a clearing that looked towards the mine. A small part of woodland they needed to search showed no signs of Chloe. It was time to return to the Miners' Arms, where they would either go home or learn the next quadrants they intended to search before heading out again, light permitting. Niamh was tired, and although she wanted to continue, as she landed on familiar territory of tarmac underfoot, her legs wobbled and failed her. Her father instinctively caught her before she hit the ground. Niamh, you need to sleep. I need to help. You can't do this. You need to sleep. Come back fresh. Dad, I'm fine. Niamh, please, I know. Dad, you don't know anything. Just leave me alone. Niamh pulled herself away from her father and bounded towards the pub, her unsteadiness resolved by her defiance. As she entered, the noise of 1,000 conversations swept over her. The energy inside was electric. The village determined to find their missing girl. The pub tables had maps rolled out, the corners held flat with pints of bitter. People were beginning to tie their laces on hiking boots and check torch batteries, ready to head out on the next wave. But as the door closed behind her, the energy dipped as people noticed her entrance. Some sympathetic smiles were offered, as well as gentle nods of recognition. She knew they wanted to ask her about the Drifter, whether he was real or supernatural. She was glad they didn't, because although she didn't believe in ghosts, what other explanation was there? Everyone shut up, something's going on. Silence swept through the pub, everyone looking towards the landlord who turned up the radio and asked whoever was on the other end to repeat what they had said. We found something over by the old mine entrance, a male voice returned, his desperation and sadness clear for everyone to hear. What have you found? The landlord asked. A top. We found a top. And it's covered in blood. Yeah. Thank you, Vic.
What a place to leave it, Darren. Fantastic. Thank you for that. You've got us all hanging now. Bloomin' heck. Thank you. So there is one name left in the hat, just to show there was no skullduggery this evening. There it goes. The hat now has its own seat in my dining room. So there you go. Noelle Holten, last but certainly not least. Noelle is an award-winning blogger at crimebookjunkie.co.uk. She is the PR and social media manager for Bookouture, a leading digital publisher in the UK. Up until late 2017, Noelle worked as a senior probation officer for 18 years, covering a variety of risk cases, as well as working in a multi-agency setting. She has 3 Hons BAs. Wow, nice. Philosophy, sociology, brackets crime and deviance, and community justice, and a master's in criminology. Noelle, you're a woman after my own heart, aka eternal student, as my parents call me. Noelle's hobbies include reading, attending as many book festivals as she can afford, and sharing the book love via her blog. Dead Inside, her debut novel with one more chapter / HarperCollins UK, is an international Kindle bestseller and the start of a new series featuring DC Maggie Jameson. I will also just mention something that Noelle has failed to mention herself in her biography. I believe you were part of Crime in the Spotlight last year, Noelle, with a certain Mr. Rankin, and was it the First Minister of Scotland?
Yes.
Yeah, you should have really included that.
Yeah, I know. I think I'm still in shock about it.
Fair play.
One of the highlights.
Huge round of applause for Noelle.
Thanks. You'll all be delighted to hear that I'm reading a very short chapter, so I won't keep you too long. I'll be reading from Dead Wrong, which I had to buy this copy myself because I wasn't able to get a published copy from my publisher yet. Just for a little context, the chapter begins, I'm going to be reading from chapter 2. So the chapter begins, my main character, Maggie Jameson, is in bed, and it kind of reminds the readers what's happened at the end of Dead Inside, and gives context to what's coming up for the rest of the book. But it can be read as a standalone. And let me just plug that this is 99p in the UK at the moment as part of the Kindle monthly deals. Okay, so chapter 2. Maggie had thought her nightmares were over when serial killer Bill Raven, also known as the Chopper, had been convicted just over 2 years previously. Having returned to her team at Stafford Police Station following a secondment in the Domestic Abuse and Homicide Unit, she believed she had left that particular case well and truly closed. Although the remains of Raven's victims were never found, he confessed willingly to abducting, dismembering, and then disposing of 3 females whom he named. Forensics at the time corroborated his account. Then, a few weeks ago, she had received a message from D.I. Rutherford, her boss at the Major and Organized Crime Department in Stafford. Maggie had been attending an event where Lucy Sherwood, a probation officer, was speaking. It was a message she would never forget. Your secondment is over at the Dahu. Raven has appealed his sentence, claimed he's innocent. Timely, I'd say, as there's been another murder. Either a copycat or the real killer picking up where they left off. Get your arse in here. She had seen the news. Body parts had been found in bins, and sweat began to trickle down her spine. Forensic details had not been released to the public, but when Maggie had returned the call to her DI and learned that the body parts had belonged to Lorraine Rugman, the first victim that Raven had named in his confession, Maggie's world had begun to fall apart. And then the anger had come. No, 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 this can't be happening. And the questions. This is not real. Is the wrong person in prison? Is Raven toying with the police? Now 3 weeks had passed since Maggie had returned to her team, and the nightmare had only got worse. She couldn't get him out of her mind. The greasy hair, the stubbled, ragged face, his lanky frame hollowed out by years of drug use, and the smell, the pungent smell that oozed from his pores, burning her nostrils. But the worst was his voice, that arrogant, smooth voice that made her skin crawl. She threw off her blankets and went on the hunt for some coffee. Ugh, It was in her head now, that voice. It was like he was in the room with her. No, wait. The voice was coming from downstairs. Ta-da! That's it.
I love the little flourish at the end. Thank you very much for that. Okay, so 10 readers, quite a bit of chat this evening as well. Thank you very much for joining us. Oh, hang on, did I forget something? Yeah, I've got a bit of an announcement, haven't I? We were hoping to keep this a little bit quiet for a little bit longer, but it turns out that you probably already saw that we were in the bookseller this week, kind of unexpectedly. Like I say, we were hoping to keep it a secret for a little bit longer, but now that the word's out, we'll share with all of you. It is true. We are producing an anthology of stories from some of the authors who have appeared at the bar and who are due to appear in the coming weeks. We will be telling you more about it over the coming weeks, but if you like what you hear, you're going to love. We've got 30 stories in this anthology, and they're all proceeds are going to go to the NHS. More news on the release date and the featured authors will be coming in the next few weeks, because Simon, as always, amazing, quick turnaround. So all we're going to say for now is keep June free, because you're possibly going to have 30 new stories to read, in addition to all the other wonderful authors that you hear week on week with us. Thank you, everybody, for joining us tonight. So our readers, you guys in the audience, to Simon, as always, for helping everything run so smoothly, and to Isaac, our bouncer. If you've enjoyed a reading tonight, please do mention it on social media using the hashtag